La Bendición 2000, Blessed 2000, is a performative work developed by Barcelona-based actress, model, and performer Meritxell Soto. The work was created during a residence at the dance studio La Piconera in 2019 and has had different iterations until now. La Bendición 2000 was conceived as a performance concert which explores the loss of religious reference in Western culture and the rise of pop culture as a global iconic universe. Pop music and aesthetics, focusing on the 2000s diva Britney Spears, is used to challenge whether a new spirituality is possible. The work consisted of different scenes that enacted the different stages of the rise and fall of idols, from idolizing to iconoclasm, ending in Britney's breakdown and destruction, what Moya Lockett called the implosion of Britney Spears' image. Therefore, the work enabled an analysis of pop stars, a stardom which is a crucial element and has, as Lee Marshall puts it, a structural function in contemporary cultural industries. From the lens of religion studies, a perspective already explored by scholars like Catherine Lofton, who in Religion and the American Celebrity examined the construction and sacrifice of Britney Spears as a religious figure within the studies on religion and America. Caralt and Soto worked in collaboration with the Departament Exoteric Research Group at the Museum of Contemporary Art of Barcelona, and with myself, in a moment when I was focusing on Goodman's concept of variation from a transmedia perspective, which provided a discursive matrix for the performer's embodied work. Drawing on this idea of variations on movement and through the methodology of Anne Bogart, the creative process behind the scene that concerns us consisted of a deconstruction, via viewpoints exercises, of 2000s divas choreographies, specifically of Britney Spears' Oops, I Did It Again, to show the underlying violence that femme bodies undergo as pop idols. This deconstruction began with a research process in between performance and philosophy. As Caralt Soto narrates herself,
it was beautiful for me, the experience of entering into the academic and research part of the text, but then, as always, and as Àger, with whom we have worked together, knows, for me it comes a moment of destruction, when it's like, I have read all of this, but now I forget it, I leave it there, and I start working with the body and where it takes me. Obviously, the body is impregnated because there are things which stay and others that are forgotten, but the body takes you somewhere else. And that is what is interesting for me about this collaboration.
this parallel research focused on the replacement of Western religious reference by a popular iconic universe, where idols rise and fall in an accelerated time period in comparison to the long duration of religious debates. The different dimensions analyzed also affected and informed the body-based development of the work, mainly its temporality, complex references, and modes of audience engagement. Concerning temporality, La Bendición 2000 played with two temporal profiles. First, a linear development throughout the scenes where the metamorphoses of the idol were shown, but second, and most importantly, a circular time profile that emphasized the repetition and iteration that characterizes the cycle of idols. Tara Brabazon and Steve Redhat in Baudrillard in Drag, Lady Gaga and the Accelerated Cycles of Pop have argued that pop time is cyclical rather than linear. Yet, if there is a characteristic of our age of fast capitalisms and critical modernities, then it is that these pop cycles are increasing in speed. Their work investigates accelerated aging and the speed at which new pop becomes old pop. The accelerated looping of pop time is brought on stage in La Bendición 2000 via the repetition and acceleration of choreographic movements, which end up exhausting the performer, and via the soundscapes of live-made loops and pre-made remixes. These sonic devices introduce the context of remix culture into the scene, a phenomenon whose interest for performance studies scholars should have increased after the rise of a broader online dance remix community in TikTok. Secondly, the complex reference stage in La Bendición 2000 was built through pulling threads out of the research process. The readings on iconography and iconoclasm brought up elements like crucifixion, the golden calf, and the anthropophagy of idols, which were incorporated into the scene either in the performing style and movements or explicitly, therefore providing a cross-millennial depth to the analysis of Britney Spears' figure, which was framed within a long-lasting human desire and even need of idolatry. It was with regards to this desire as well that the modes of audience engagement were designed. Caralt and Soto examined the distinction between absorption addiction idolatry and identification emulation idolatry in pop culture. Understanding an idol as an enchanting figure inducing the person's worship, La Bendición 2000 reinforced the enchantment effect of the performance via ritualistic devices that opened up a space of trance where a feeling of participation and communitas could emerge among the audience. This kind of participation was modeled on a law of participation defined by Owen Barfield as a collective mental state of extreme emotional intensity, where representation is still not differentiated from movement and action, which transform the communion towards which they tend into a reality for the group. The participation is lived so efficiently that it is still not properly imagined. This kind of participation was triggered by immersive and embracing soundscapes, rhythmically changing, mesmerizing body movements, and dizziness-inducing light effects. This mise-en-scène invited to focus on the movement alone, in such a way that its nuances and effects on the body could be noticed. About these strategies, Caralt and Soto notes:
Clothing can respond to a concrete device, and my proposal was precisely to take a very concrete element, like the movement's repetition, and try to focus on it as much as possible. As much as possible, although there are the circumstances and 1,000 factors operating, but trying to focus on this element because I thought it was a good way to deconstruct it and isolate it, to be able to analyze it in itself without the load of the rest of elements, which are very significant, like clothing, what you show, what you don't. For me, it was important to look for maybe not neutral, but a kind of clothing that was not directly connected to Britney's wall or to this kind of choreographies and stars, to be able to detach it.
Due to the theory-laden creative process of La Bendición 2000 and its exploration of gender normativity constructs through performative practices, the piece was presented and recorded in the International Conference in Disciplinas in 2019. This is the only record of the clearest stage of the piece as a viewpoint practice, since it was heavily modified afterwards. The video and photographic records of the live performance were also used as a pedagogical device for online audiences of art-based undergraduate modules to explore existentialist approaches to gender. To examine the digital asynchronic performance's effectiveness in comparison to the live performance, 3 dimensions will be explored. First, the enhancing and degrading of the performance in the recordings. Second, the impact of the presence or absence of the artist during the playing and discussion of the recorded performance. And third, the audience's engagement in a Zoom platform viewing of the recording.
Everything that has to do with movement on stage and in a performative act is aestheticized because we want it to be a product so that someone can see it and understand it as a concrete structure But at the end of the day, these are tools that all of us use in our everydayness. Everything that has to do with gesture, movement and tempos, but we do so unconsciously and not with an artistic end or wanting to visualize anything. Then this repetition of movements or types of movements ends up building up this performativity and learning where I extract my movements from and from where I don't, because those movements don't belong to me, because they are not part of what I represent, of my identity. It is a clear example of how to look at gender, not so much from a rationality and a discourse, but rather from something as tangible as this pure repetition of patterns related to my identity. The reflection upon the aesthetic value of recordings in front of live performance has been a topic of discussion in aesthetics for a long time. One can note Christy McWhirter's famous paper, Recordings as Performances, where she argues that there is no in principle aesthetic difference between a live performance and a recording of that performance, because the proper aesthetic object is a type which is instantiated by the performance and potentially repeatable when recordings are played back. According to McWhirter, the difference between a live performance and its recording is not ontological, but rather, if the recording has any lag, it is due to technological limitations that prevent us from getting a full record of the type. Some support this hypothesis of technological differentiation, like Bob Locke in Recording Dance, a full and truthful record, while others still seem to find troublesome to reduce to technology the problem of absence and presence that mediatized video recording of live performances pose, like Dennis Varney and Rachel Fenshon in More and Less Than, Liveness, Video Recording and the Future of Performance. The bodily presence of the performer becomes a problematic point because, as Varney and Fensham argue, to propose that performance can maintain its separateness from mediatized images is to perpetuate unrealistically a binary logic of the live and the recorded, the pure and the contaminated, the original and its encroachment. This binary logic cannot be maintained if we want to research performance. Video is a necessary and unnecessarily malign aid to research. Without it, performance disappears and we lose our history and our capacity to think through performance. Therefore, what Varney and Fensham propose is that performance and its video recording should not be considered as equivalent, but rather that video recording is a specific mode of instantiation of the performance in a media that has a set of characteristics that differ from those of live performance. Taking into account these differences is important when evaluating video recordings, which are nevertheless a fundamental tool for performance research today. Varney and Fensham vindicate our need to explore how we watch performance video recordings, asking, more productively, what does a video generate for performance analysis and criticism? In what follows, I will draw on Varney and Fensham's best practice guide for responsible viewing to examine the signifying capacity of Caralt Soto's presence during the video recording viewing of La Bendición 2000 in a Zoom class, and the students' engagement in this platform. Concerning the repetition of the same difference, the combination of the unedited video recording and the photographic record enabled a reiteration of sight from different points of view. The photos invited the viewers to pay attention to different details of the image in motion, a combination precluded in live performance. Secondly, the freeze frame enabled the discussion of specific moments of the performance, specifically that of the ending, which consists of the manifestation of exhaustion in Caralt Soto's body, who falls on her knees at no predetermined point of the choreographic loop.
the freeze frame triggered comments and analysis of the performance, posture, and clothing. The material textures of the video recording were a bit lost due to the limitations of the Zoom platform, but the grain photographic record provided an aid to recovering the game of light and shadow of the performance. In fourth place, the closeness that a laptop screen offered is probably the most notable characteristic of this viewing. The intimacy with the video recording was enhanced by the presence of the actress, who watched together with the viewer, providing a double illusion of intimacy that changed the experience of the performance. Since in La Bendición 2000, Caralt y Soto is so focused and immersed in the choreography that the viewer has only two choices: to get immersed in the movement as well, but not with the performer, or to stay at a safe distance and avoid any relationship. In this specific case, there was no cutting up or editing of the performance, so the cathartic path still operates in a non-interrupted viewing. Also, there were no vocal interruptions due to the context of a classroom, and it was only Caralt y Soto and I that had the power to stop or play the recording. It is also worth noting that the perverse and cruel control of the play button mirrors the violence on the body via repetition and speed that is staged in La Bendición 2000, a violence that is manifest in the ending of the scene with Caralt y Soto exhausted on the floor. On this, she comments.
It was not something I had thought about before rehearsals. It simply occurred in the repetition, which led me there. Maybe it was because of something that weighs on all of us. Maybe it has to do with this feeling of obligation to fit in some canons and patterns. This ends up exhausting you, and you either renounce, give up, or you cope somehow. It probably comes from here, from something very unconscious, a social lived experience of this kind of performativity that we seem to be forced to carry out if we want to be accepted in various domains.
However, the video recording did trigger a demand for further urgency and investigation. First, in the discussion with the whole group and with the request by some viewers of a copy of the recording to rewatch it. This desire to look again and again, paradoxically, was very in line with the need for appropriation of idols and the anthropophagic desire that Caralt y Soto questioned in this work. And for us, it raises the question about the ethical considerations of using a video recording of a performer's body for pedagogical uses, its virtues and perversions, and how we should proceed to set up processes of responsible viewing, at least in educational environments.